Good morning, everybody. I'd like to those of you that have not found a seat yet, if you could please do so. We will go ahead and get this conference started. We're welcoming you to our human trafficking conference. We're glad to have you all here with us this morning. I'm impressed that so many are interested in learning more about this topic, and it's much bigger than Connecticut and New England, but we can only do what we can do in our neighborhood to start with. So thank you for being here. And before we get started, I'd like to go through some housekeeping details with you. In the event of an emergency evacuation, please enter the door, or please exit the door on my left here, and go out into the parking lot, and we will gather there. Rest assured, we've not had an incident where we needed to do that in the past, so the odds are in our favor. Bathrooms, if you're looking for them, are located in the hallway here on the right. Go through the doors. The first door on the left is the ladies' room, and the second door on your right is the men's room. And for those who are able, there's a unisex bathroom downstairs just past the kitchen on your right. Let's see. In the event that details of the conference become kind of overwhelming to some people and disturbing, we've set up a quiet room out in the hallway also. If you go through the hallway, past the ladies' room, there's a sign that says quiet room that's pointing up the stairs, and there will be a Stephen minister in there to sit with you quietly, someone that you can speak to if you like, or you can just sit by yourself and collect your thoughts and just spend time together to gentle your heart. Okay. And feel free to return to the refreshment counters over here, and coffee and tea and juice and water, I think, over there. There's plenty to choose from, so help yourself throughout the conference. Thank you.
One more time.
Testing?
No.
Testing?
Yes.
Okay. Hi! Good to see everybody. My name is Kathy Schroll, and along with my husband Bill, I am co-convener of the Companions of Mission Ministry Network of the Episcopal Church in Connecticut. For those of you unfamiliar with the network, we are a group of people who love Jesus from various worshiping communities all over Connecticut. We meet together to support each other in our work with God's people outside our parishes, and to periodically encourage gatherings like this, where we can learn about needs and how to recognize and to help heal them. Our members work in partnership with a large number of organizations covering a whole range of needs, both domestically, such as today's gathering, and internationally. Today, we are blessed to have Rob Morris and Kirsten Standlick of Love 46. Rob Morris is the founder and program director of Love 46. We also have, for a panel discussion, Amy Hashida and John Deschiger and a few others, Tim, and they'll introduce themselves when we get to that portion. They'll be leading a panel discussion. These are the experts. Let us learn from them. So, Companions in Mission, and there are two others of us here, if you'd stand up, at least one other, Elaine. Actually, Elaine helped find our experts. We'd like to welcome you all today. We also want to sincerely thank St. James Church, their mission committee, and Trinity Christian Tabernacle for organizing and hosting this event.
Amen.
We also especially want to welcome the community leaders here today. Danbury is a hot spot for human trafficking, and the people in this room need to be part of the solution. So, welcome all. And now I would like to ask Pastor Everett Anderson of Trinity Christian Tabernacle to open us with prayer and to bless our work together.
Amen.
Thank you and God bless you. Based on what I'm hearing, it seems like we're going to have a wonderful day today. Do you believe that? I totally thank God. Amen. And we are here and we are gathered here just to thank God for the gathering, and we are here to thank God for His protection, and we are here to thank God for the information that we are about to receive, which I believe would help all of us to do something for the church community. So in saying that, I would just ask you to bow your heads in prayer as we go before the Lord. Amen. Because in all things we need to seek His guidance. Precious Father, in the name of the Lord Jesus, we truly appreciate you today, and we thank you for the gathering of your people. The subject topic to me is very interesting, and we have learned and have heard that we are experts that are here to bring us into the things that are happening, that maybe we have the basic, but they have the depths. We believe this is information that we need so that when we leave here today, dear Lord, we can be able to use it in our community, in every area, and to help others that they may understand the type of world that we are living in. But we just thank you for the gathering today. We ask that you will lead us in all truth, give us information, and help us to digest the information. Bless each and every speaker today, and let us enjoy and be successful. Father, we leave all things in your hands today, and we just tell you thanks for doing that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, without much more said, Rod, we would like you to come forward and lead us in this next segment. Yeah. Since it's working, we'll just... I agree. Don't. My dad used to say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. If it's not working, go for it. Well, good morning. Good morning. Man, this is amazing. I was getting a little concerned. Yesterday I got stuck on a train going into New York for a long time because of the rain, and then it looked like today was going to be okay. So the idea that you came out on Saturday morning when you could actually be just like, oh, this is one of those cozy, cold, rainy days, you just want to stay in, but you came out because you care, is a beautiful thing. And so thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things that I love about coming and sharing and speaking with people who are people that are motivated by faith is that there is this different posture. I speak in a lot of different venues and a lot of different places. You go to like a university type setting, and most of the time you have a posture kind of like, convince me that I should care about this. There's a million things that I'm being asked to care about. There's so many things or whatever, or convince me, state a case or whatever. But coming into places where there are people motivated by faith, the posture feels different to me. There is this like leaning forward kind of approach and posture of like, man, I'm already in. Just give me some marching instructions and we're going to go there. So I love that posturing, and it's kind of what even birthed Love 146 21 years ago. In fact, we turned 21 last week, actually, 21 years as an organization. And here's the beautiful thing. If we tried to do this 21 years ago, this would not take place. All right? Very few people knew or understood much about human trafficking 21 years ago. In fact, the terminology called human trafficking to describe this kind of crime against human beings was relatively new terminology. The issue and the situation and the human rights abuse that we call human trafficking has been around forever, but that terminology was relatively new. I remember when we first tried to do an event on the New Haven Green, which is where our U.S. headquarters is in New Haven, back 21 years ago. We had these signs about trafficking and everything like that, and we had people driving by like, yeah, I hate the traffic on 91 and 95. I was like, no, that's not what we're talking about. But we had to sort of, that was the stretch of like getting people to understand, but not just understand, but then taking it to another level of getting people to care. And then beyond caring, doing something about it. And so there's been this long sort of trajectory. And honestly, the beauty of being around for as long as we've been around is that we have this historical perspective of how far we've come. Because honestly, and the folks from the underground can attest to this as well, that there's this feeling sometimes of feeling like we're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Is the problem are we getting any closer? It seems like the statistics are getting bigger. There's more and more people. Are we making any progress? But when you look back over the years, over a couple of decades, we are absolutely making progress. And that almost every country in the world now is doing something to address human trafficking, and there's a lot of pressure on countries to do something about human trafficking. In the United States, every state now in the United States has some kind of legislation on the books dealing with human trafficking, whereas 21 years ago, that was not the case. There are more and more trainings for law enforcement, for first responders, for working in emergency rooms, all of that stuff. Flight attendants, in the travel industry. These things did not exist the way they do now 21 years ago. So there is definitely progress happening, and even the care and the level of care for people who have experienced this horrific crime has increased as well and has deepened. And so there are things that are changing, and we are making progress. So it's an important thing to look at sort of the historical perspective of all of that. And in honesty, when people ask, hey, how are things going with Love 146? I always feel this quick feeling of tension on how do I answer that question, right? Because there's a, if I was a business or a company selling a product or something, I'd be able to say things are going great because we're growing like crazy. But the reality and the reason why we're growing is absolutely horrific. I mean, so does that mean we're doing good or not doing it? Like, it's such a strange question. Like, the ideal answer to that one day would be to be able to say, you know what? I think in about a year, our services are not going to be needed anymore, and we're not going to need to exist because we've been tackling this problem, and so many people have joined the fight to tackle this problem, that there's not going to be the same need that there is now. That would be the ultimate answer, would be like, we're out of business. But the reality is we're not. And so that's why coming together like this in a situation like this is so important and is so encouraging to us to see people that care enough to come out on a really rainy Saturday morning because you care. So there is a civil rights leader from way back, W.E.B. Du Bois, who made this statement. He said, there is but one coward on earth, and that is the coward who dare not know. I think there is something instinctively in all of us when we hear about really horrific things happening in the world. There's a part of us that wants to turn away, right? Because it's so painful, it's so heartbreaking, and you're inundated now with the news every single day of horrific things happening, right? In your face, all the time. And even as an organization, you were described just earlier as experts, and I saw a couple of folks here from the underground, sort of like, I don't know, I think we're kind of like figuring this out as we go. The real experts are those that have lived experience, that understand what is involved in this kind of horrific human rights abuse. But when we think about this stuff, when we think about how painful it is and how heartbreaking the issue is, there's a part of us that wants to turn away, bury my head in the sand. And so I love this statement that he made, that, man, it takes courage to say, I'm not going to look away, that I actually want to see. So you coming out this morning, you may not even realize this when you got out of bed and got ready to come here, but it was an act of courage. You were refusing to say, I'm not going to turn away. You're saying, I am going to know. I want to know. But then now what do we do from that point on? And I love this. There was a statement that a Jewish historian by the name of Yehuda Bauer made concerning the Holocaust. And I think it's applicable to this situation, or really any sort of human rights abuse happening in the world. He said this: I have a suggestion that we add 3 new commandments to the existing 10 commandments. And he said, and they look like this. First of all, thou shalt not be a perpetrator. Secondly, thou shalt not be a victim. Thirdly, thou shalt never, ever be a bystander. And so there's something about saying, I want to know, I'm not going to turn away, but then taking it to the point of like, I refuse to be a bystander. I actually will do something about this. I'm reminded oftentimes of a situation that happened when I was in high school. This was a very, very, very long time ago. I was on my school bus leaving the school parking lot at the end of the day, and somebody on the bus yells, "Fight! Fight!" And we look out the window, and there was this crazy fight happening in the parking lot. I have no idea what was going on, but there was one kid that about 15 other people were piling on. I don't know what this kid did to upset so many people, but they were pounding the life out of this kid, and it was horrific. And we all rushed to the side of the bus. I don't know if you can remember all the way back to high school days, but this was a scene, right? We didn't have iPhones. Nowadays, everybody would whip out their phones and everything and just videotape it. We didn't have that, so we all rushed to the side of the bus to get a window seat to watch the horrific thing happening in the parking lot, and it was horrific. They were just jumping on this kid, kicking him in his skin. He was curled up in a fetal position. They're smashing this kid to pieces. And I remember there was a kid on the bus. He was on the baseball team. And I remember that little fact because he ran to the back of the bus and he pulls his baseball bat out of his duffel bag and he yells at the bus driver, "Stop the bus! Stop the bus!" And I remember the bus driver looking in the mirror, slamming on the brakes of the bus, and she opens the door of the bus. And I'll never forget this scene as this kid barrels off of the bus, literally risking his own safety and life. He hurls himself into this angry mob of people, and he's swinging his bat, and he's crying. I mean, sobbing, and he's yelling, "Leave him alone, leave him alone. He's just one kid. He's just one kid." And he disperses this mob single-handedly. And I will never forget the feeling that overwhelmed me in that moment as I discovered what I was. That, man, I'm just an observer. That's all I am. I'm sitting on the safety of this bus, looking out the windows on horrific injustice, never thinking about engaging. And if I did think about it, I can't remember now whether I did or not, but what are all the reasons we come up with were probably the same reasons that I was entertaining, right? Of just like, well, what could one person do? I'm just one kid, and there's 15 of these people. There's nothing that I can do, you know, or my own safety. I can't do, I'm not gonna be able to do, I'll get killed out there and everything. Only one kid on that bus had the courage to not only see, but then actually engage. And I believe that there was a seed planted in me in that moment of like, I never want to feel like this again. I never want to be the bystander again. And really, this is the call, and especially as people of faith, this is the call of God, if you would, on us, to not be bystanders. I love that in Isaiah 59. The prophet Isaiah is talking about where God is looking around and there's injustice everywhere. There is the oppressed that people are taking advantage of and exploiting everywhere. And I used to think that nothing could shock or astonish God, right? He's the creator of the universe, right? He's seen it all. There's nothing that can take him by surprise. There's nothing that can shock him. But there is this one verse in all of the Bible that I found that there is something that can astonish God. And surprisingly, it's not what I would have thought that it would be. I would think it would be the oppression. I would think that the way that human beings create other human beings, how image bearers of God, treat other image bearers of God, that would be enough to shock and astonish God, right? The idea that children, the most vulnerable amongst us, would be exploited and trafficked for somebody else's profit or pleasure is insanity to me. I would think that that would be shocking to the Creator, but that's not what he says shocks him. In Isaiah 59, God says, I looked and injustice was happening everywhere. There was the oppressed everywhere that people were exploiting and taking advantage of. And I looked for somebody to intervene. And I was shocked, astonished, stunned that I found no one. I don't know about you, but as a person of faith, that challenges me to the core. I don't want to be one that contributes to astonishing God in that way by my inaction or being on the safety of the bus that sometimes we can use even as the church becomes the safety of the bus, where we just look out the windows out there. You know, every once in a while we'll have the courage to get off real quick, but then we get back on where it's safe. I feel like God wants us in the mess of it all, in the madness of it all, and showing up with hope in those dark places. And so that's kind of the call. So it's not enough just to know, it then requires us of something else to actually engage. You know, Love 146 began 21 years ago because of an encounter. And you know, there is a proverb that says, "My eye affects my heart." There is something that happens when you see with your own eyes, right? And that's why it's so much easier just to, I don't want to see because then I may be required to do something, so I'm just going to look away or whatever, right? But Love 146 was birthed because of an encounter. Myself and a couple of friends were hearing about this thing called child trafficking, and we were like, what is this? This is crazy that this happens to children. And the common denominator between us as friends is that we cared about kids. We had these public platforms. I was a musician. Another friend of mine was a musician. We had a photographer and an artist. And we were just like, we cared about kids. And so we were like, well, how is this happening? Could we use our public platforms to do something about this? And so we connected to an organization at the time that was made up of criminal investigators and attorneys that work in these kinds of areas of injustice. And we had connected with them, and they were like, look, if you're going to talk about this stuff and use your public platforms, you really need to understand it. You really need to educate yourself. This is what we tell everybody. When people say, what can I do? The first thing that anyone can do, educate yourself. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what trafficking is and what it looks like and all of that. So educate yourself. And nowadays, there is so much access to good information that is out there. Go to the Underground's website. Go to Love 146. There's some good, solid stuff out there that you can learn and educate so that you know what it looks like and actually can do something about it. But we had heard about it, and so they were like, if you really want to understand it, you really need to educate yourself. So we began this process of educating ourselves, and part of that, they invited us to see what they do firsthand in one of their operating centers in a Southeast Asian country. And so we went, and we had by that time built a relationship with the head of this organization. He invited us to go to see one of their centers. We went to Southeast Asia, and while we were there, they were in the middle of an investigation that was taking place in a particular brothel where it was expected that children were being sold. And they were going to go in this particular night in the city that we were staying in, and they said, do you want to come in with us? And you guys, now that we look back, we're like, this is not a good idea. We would never recommend that an organization invites civilians and people into a situation like that for a variety of reasons, not only for the safety of the people going in, but for the safety of the children that are in there and the people that are in there. It could have unintended, horrific consequences and put a lot of people at risk. So we would never recommend that. But because of the trust that had been established already with the head of this organization, they trusted us. They were like, this is what we do. And they basically go in undercover. They have undercover surveillance equipment on. They pose as customers. They go into these places. They gather evidence. When they have enough evidence that they feel warrants a recovery operation, they bring it to law enforcement, and they actually have to do a second. Amazingly, they have to do a second investigation of local law enforcement to weed out those that might be corrupt or getting paid by brothel managers or traffickers to look the other way. And so once they find those that are sympathetic within law enforcement to be able to do something about it, legitimately, they give that evidence to them, and there's a recovery operation. Kids are taken out of these situations and hopefully into a recovery center that is legitimate and credible and effective, and they begin a long journey, hopefully, back home again, if their home wasn't complicit in them being trafficked to begin with, because that's often the case. A family member, a friend, a neighbor, or whatever. Now, I just oversimplified, for the sake of time, an unbelievably complicated, long process, okay? It's not a black and white simple scenario at all. In fact, the longer you start learning about trafficking, you realize it is the proverbial rabbit hole that gets darker and more complex the further in you go. And so they basically gave us these brief instructions on how to pose as the very thing that everything in me is completely and utterly repulsed by, how to pose as a customer interested in these kids. And again, this is not something that we would, now that the things that we've learned through the years, is something we would ever recommend people do. And so we went in with them, and I remember the last thing this one investigator said before we went in, he says, if you don't think you can do this, please don't come in, because if you
break cover. If you give anything, it could destroy this investigation. We're like, oh, no worries. Until we got in there. And we found ourselves standing in this room looking through these glass windows. Behind the glass were these kids wearing these matching red dresses, having even the dignity of a name stripped from them, just numbers pinned to their dresses. And on this side of the glass, we're standing shoulder to shoulder with predators who were purchasing these kids for sex. And there was workers that were handing us literal menus with the numbers of the children of what they can provide. And I remember in that moment, the words of that investigator raging through my brain, right? If you don't think you can hold it together, because everything in me, as a man, as a father, as a human being, was really struggling holding it together as I was seeing what I was seeing. You know, all the thoughts that go through your head in that moment, right? Of like what you want to do in that situation. And we couldn't do anything because of this investigation and the desire to bring some sort of real justice in this situation and not just a quick flash in the pan moment that ends up causing more harm than good. And I will never forget the looks in the eyes of these kids. You know, they were sitting there watching children's cartoons on crackling little television sets. And they were just staring at these sets, and there was this sort of blank kind of stare. And this is what trauma can do to a human being, right? And they all were sort of staring at these TVs except for one girl. And I will never forget her. I will never forget her face. She was the only one not looking at the children's cartoons. She was staring in our direction through the glass. And I don't know what I was seeing in her eyes, whether it was trauma, whether it was fight, whether it was defiance or whatever, but I will never forget that stare. I'll never forget those eyes. I'll never forget her number. Her number was 146. And so when we began to when we started the organization, we started looking at who we were after we started it and renaming. We actually had a different name in the beginning, and then after thinking it through and wanting to make sure that we remember that this is not about an issue or a cause, but it is about real human beings. I think, in all honesty, it's so easy for us to dehumanize people by putting them under categories. You know, we talk about the poor, the homeless, the refugees, the undocumented people, we put the in front of groups of people, and we lump everybody in there, and we forget that we're actually talking about human beings here. And so when we looked at ourselves and looked at this situation, looked at who we were as an organization, we were like, we want to remember that this is about a child. This is about a human being. This is not about issues or causes, but real human beings. And so when we started the organization, it was to remember that that's what this is about. And so when we talk about this today, and you're going to hear a panel discussion from the folks from the underground, and remember when you hear statistics and you hear numbers and you hear it all, what we're actually talking about is real people, real human beings that have experienced horrific stuff. And so when we started the organization, we didn't want to reinvent any wheels, and this is one of the things I've loved about the underground. We have very much the same sort of core values, especially when it comes to how can we be helpful. We don't want to reinvent, we want to figure out what are the gaps, where can we actually do something that will be meaningful and actually contribute something to stopping this from happening. And so when we birthed the organization, it was through that. One of the things that we identified as an area of weakness was that we would hear from these investigators and these other organizations doing these recovery things of like, hey, we know where there's kids right now, but there aren't enough places that are legitimately places where they can begin the long road of recovery. There are a lot of institutional type settings where kids would be ripped out of these situations, which is another traumatic experience. Don't picture the knight in shining armor rescuing. That is not the situation. It's unbelievably traumatic. And so the big question is, what comes after that? You know, especially in America, we love the knight in shining armor rescuing the damsel in distress narrative, right? We never think about what happens after that, right? That's where the real work begins. The physical removal from the actual situation is the first baby step, and then the real work begins. And we recognize that institutional type settings, kids would be in a recovery operation brought into an institutional government-run facility, and within 2 weeks, the vast majority of them would run away and go back to the brothel because the brothel felt more like a family to them. That's crazy, right? That's like something's got to change there. And so we were like, what can we do about that? The aspect of survivor care. What would effective survivor care look like that could actually work? And so we were not experts. And so one of the first things we did as an organization is as you said in the very beginning here, we identified experts in the field and we brought them into Love 146. And so we began our survivor care program. We had an amazing Filipino woman, PhD, doctor, child psychologist, won the presidential award in the Philippines for her work with kids, does unbelievable trainings for grassroots caregivers in places, and we ended up bringing her in, and she created our first survivor care program specifically in the Philippines. So we started doing survivor care there for a while, then we started doing survivor care in the UK, and then we started doing survivor care here in the state of Connecticut, because this is not something that just happens over there. Right? Oftentimes that's the first big jump of when people are like, wait, I thought this was something that happens like in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. This happens here? It absolutely happens here. In fact, right here in the state of Connecticut, Love 146 has been able to provide direct services to over 800 kids who are either confirmed or suspected victims of trafficking. That's just in the small sliver of a state of Connecticut, 800 kids. So this is a very real situation, not just in places in Southeast Asia, but places like right here in our own towns, in our own cities. And so we started doing survivor care. And then after a while, we started recognizing that we're never going to end this by just caring for survivors, right? We had this bold vision statement as an organization, the end of child trafficking and exploitation, nothing less. And then we realized we're not ending this, we're just caring for, it's the classic story you hear in social justice circles, right? Where there's bodies floating down a river every day. You've probably heard this illustration, right? And people are picking the bodies out of the river, and there's sick people, and they're building hospitals for the sick. There's children without parents, and they're pulling the children out and building orphanages, and we're dealing with all of these bodies floating down a river, and nobody at any time ever thought, you know what, maybe we should go up beyond the bend in the river and try to figure out why all these bodies are floating down the river, right? Because that's much harder. That's the justice piece, right? The mercy piece, we get to see the results of doing mercy. It gets to be an instantaneous sense of satisfaction for us, but man, when you're dealing with justice, you're dealing with systems, and systems just take so freaking long to change and to see justice actually come. But that was starting to feel like an ache in us and a tension, like we have this bold vision, but we're not actually ending it. I often talk about this visual because it sticks in my brain. I would take for years, I would take a bus from Hamden down into New Haven on the main route of Whitney Avenue. And when I was on the bus, we'd always pass at the same time of day this woman who was on a push scooter going to work, right? And she was like dressed for work. She had her messenger bag on, her laptop and everything like that, and she'd just be hauling down Whitney Avenue, pushing her scooter to work. And I remember having this sort of like internal chuckle one day as I was watching her, I was thinking, man, she's gonna have one really big muscular leg, because it's just one leg doing all of the work and everything, right? And I thought, that's us as an organization of like, we're working out this survivor care arm, and we're doing a really great job of it in different places that we were working. But the prevention thing was this like leg that wasn't like getting any exercise. And that's when we started looking at prevention and what would effective prevention look like. And we eventually developed our prevention education curriculum, which is called Not a Number, that is now being utilized in 32 states. It was just a dream that we would get it into like 10 states just a few years ago. It's now in 32 states, being used in public schools, being used by juvenile justice agencies and child welfare agencies. It's been a phenomenal win, and kids are being equipped to identify their own vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities of their friends and what to do about it and what trafficking actually looks like and how to protect themselves and their own vulnerabilities. Because this, at the end of the day, and you'll probably hear this on the panel discussion, all has to do with vulnerability. Right? I love that there's a lot of older folks like me in this room right now. So this is gonna resonate with you, because I've shared this in other places where it's like in a college room, people look at me like, what are you talking about? How many of you remember a show called Wild Kingdom? Yes! Finally! I said that in a university setting, people are like, huh? So you remember this guy called Marlon Perkins, right? You remember Marlon Perkins? Oh, I'm getting yeses and nods. This is awesome. I remember as a little kid on Sunday nights, it was on right before Disney, on Sunday nights, we would sit there and we would watch Wild Kingdom. And I remember one of the things that used to freak me out as a little kid was when you'd hear Marlon Perkins' voiceover with a scene where you'd see some sort of out on the plains of some country in Africa or whatever, you would see these grazing gazelle or some sort of gazelle type creature or zebras or whatever, and they're out in the middle of these plains and they're grazing and they're peaceful and everything, and then you'll hear Marlon Perkins, he'll be like, but look closely in the tall grass surrounding the plain, right? And you'll see the grass moving, and sure enough, there is like a lion creeping through the grass ever so slowly towards the edge of the field. And then I remember as a kid watching that, and Marlon would just be like hyping it up, like watch closely. And I'm like, no. And I wanted to yell through the TV screen to the zebra or the antelope or whatever they were, run for your lives, there's a lion in the grass, right? And sure enough, the lion would bolt. And here's what's so interesting. The lion would never go after the strongest or the healthiest or the fastest in the herd. It would always go after the most vulnerable, the young, the infirmed, or the elderly. And I'm thinking now, when I think through that kind of thing, I'm thinking, this is like human beings. And that's crazy. That there is this predatory thing that happens, the ability to identify the most vulnerable and go after the most vulnerable. And so our prevention curriculum has been developed because we want to eliminate as much as we possibly can and address or at least create awareness in young people of their vulnerabilities. Kids have no idea when they go and they share all their struggles and stuff publicly online, who's in the grass. But it is a very real thing. It is a very a reality that there needs to be an understanding and awareness, and not just an awareness, but now what do I do with that awareness? And so we created that prevention education curriculum. And so our organization has grown through the years, through both our survivor care as well as our prevention, enabling us in the last 20 years to reach a little over 71,000 children globally. And that's made possible by people on the ground, people that are generous in donating to the work, and all of that, people that have come together and said, I'm in, what can I do? People that have taken their vocations and their expertise and added it to the equation. This is the thing that's making a dent, not just for us, but for other organizations as well. And I'm sure you're going to hear from the underground when they talk about how even they've seen the shift and the change that's taking place of people's interest, and not only interest, but wanting to actually engage in meaningful ways. And so it's a really important thing. But all that to say, it's super important to remember that it is about the one. It's what Mother Teresa used to say, right? When she says, man, if I didn't pick up the one off the streets of Calcutta, I never would have picked up the 40,000. And we're talking about individual people. When I think about individual people, I think about a young girl that I had met in a safe home in Southeast Asia many, many years ago. And she had just been brought to the safe home. And she was so traumatized, she would spend her days at the edge of the safe home property, sitting in a pile of dirt, separating herself from everyone else, and just taking handfuls of dirt and pouring dirt over her head, wanting to disappear into the ground. You guys, I can't even fathom that level of trauma, especially in a child, that would just want to disappear into the ground. So when I think about this issue or this cause, I think about people like that I've met and have encountered that are very real, the individual, and that's what this whole thing at the end of the day is all about. So what do we do about it is the big question. We engage in meaningful ways. You know, there's a great story that you've probably heard so many times. Have you heard the starfish story? About it's sort of like the individual thing that I just said, like it's about the one. You know, if you haven't heard this is a classic story you hear, where there's a kid that wakes up in the morning, they're on vacation with his family, he goes out to the beach from his hotel room, he walks out onto the beach early in the morning before the sun is barely up, and he sees all these baby starfish all over the beach. And he moves into panic mode of thinking, oh my gosh, these starfish are going to die. There's too many starfish. The sun is going to come up and they're going to dry up here and die on the beach. Or when the sun comes up, the seagulls are going to be able to see them and the seagulls are going to start picking them off. And so the kid, like in a panic, starts running around on the beach,
picking up a starfish, running down to the edge of the ocean, throwing the starfish in the ocean, running back, getting another starfish, throwing it in to the ocean, until finally his father comes out and sees what his son is doing and recognizes the futility of what his son's trying to do there on the beach. And he looks at his kid and he's like, son, do you really think you're going to make that much of a difference by doing this? There's no way you're going to save all these baby starfish. And then the son has that classic answer as he takes one of the starfish, he goes down to the edge of the water, throws it into the water, and he says, but for that one, I've made all the difference, right? And we get these like, ooh, these warm fuzzies and everything, but there's something about that story that's always irritated me. And it's basically this question that rages in me when I hear it. Why is there only one kid on that beach picking up starfish? What if that kid started pounding on the doors of rooms, of houses and everything, and said, please, the starfish are going to die on the beach. Come out to the beach, come out to the beach. And that beach began to flood with people picking up starfish. What kind of radical change and difference could be made there on the beach? And that's what days like this are about. It's people coming to the beach. It's people coming out of their houses saying, man, I'm in on a Saturday morning that's rainy and cold, where everything in you just wants to stay in bed, or whatever. You're saying, I hear the call. I'm out. I'm on the beach. I'm going to do. And when we fill the beaches, because we know as an organization, we have this bold vision, the end of child trafficking and exploitation, nothing less. We know there's no way we could fulfill that mission on our own. It's impossible. We would be really naive to think we could. We recognize that it takes a lot of other organizations. It takes law enforcement. It takes service providers. It takes attorneys. It takes people that give generously. It takes people of all shapes and sizes and walks of life saying, I want to engage. I want to get off the bus. I want to do something about it that makes all the difference. You know, what can you do about it? And we'll probably hear more here in a minute in a panel discussion. Here's a couple of quick things. These are really basic things. We'll probably get more into depth later. First of all, show up. Check it out. You could just kind of tick that box off. You just did that today. Show up. That's key. It's absolutely crucial. Get educated. Learn as much as you possibly can. Again, there's a ton of resources. The Underground has resources. We have resources. You go to our website. There's resources there for parents, how to help make sure that you're protecting your kid from the possibility of people that will take advantage of their own vulnerabilities. There's resources there for kids. There's all sorts of information about what actually trafficking is and what it looks like, what kind of signs to look for. We even talk about the myths of trafficking. There's a lot of myths out there and misinformation. So get educated, and then with that education, with that understanding and that information, educate others. We all have some spheres of influence, right? We all, I mean, even if you have one friend, that's a sphere of influence of some kind. You can educate that friend. You can educate family. You can educate people around you. And you don't have to be the person that brings it down in every conversation, right? It's like, I often refer to myself sort of like as the dinner guest from hell, right? Where it's just like, you know, people that, you know, hey, you know, I heard a little bit about what you do. I'd love to take you out to dinner or whatever. And sure enough, at some point, you know the conversation's going to turn there, right? I remember one time, there was this, I spoke, it was actually at a church, and this pastor was like, hey, there's a couple in my church, it's actually their anniversary. They were going to go out to dinner and celebrate their anniversary, but they really want to meet you and talk to you a little bit about your work and you know, have you come out to dinner with them. And I'm like, it's their anniversary, man. You don't want me ruining your anniversary. And they were like, no, we really want to hang out and stuff like this. So I go out to dinner with this couple for their anniversary, and I'm avoiding the subject at every possible opportunity. So tell me how you met. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. Oh, my wife and I have been married, you know, and trying to keep it really light and everything. And finally, they're like, so tell us more about Love 146 and what you do. No. Sure enough, within like the first half hour, we're all sitting at the table with tears coming down our faces and everything. And it was like, it was that, right? It's that sort of thing. So, but you don't have to be that. Same thing on airplanes. If I'm traveling, 14 hours to Southeast Asia, at some point, the guy sitting next to me or the lady sitting there going to be like, so, are you going to Thailand on business or pleasure? Business. Really? What do you do? oh my gosh, here it goes. And I try to keep it like, I run a human rights organization called Love 146. Love 146? What does that mean? What is that? Oh boy, and here we go. I've also had people writing checks literally before they go off the plane because without that opportunity, you're stuck with me for the next 14 hours. You're going to hear it all. So anyway, you don't have to be that person, but you'll find opportunities in just your relationships and the people that you're mingling with, whether it's at work or whatever, to share bits and pieces and educate people so that there is an understanding. And parents are all concerned nowadays, right, about their kids. And man, my kids spend so much time online, I don't even know who they're talking to. I don't know who they're connected with. They have like 1,000-something friends or 10,000 friends on this social media app, and I know that my kid doesn't know 10,000. Who are these people? And all of that. Being able to equip parents and educators, even same thing in schools, and educating parents or teachers of this is what it looks like, and that's some of what Love 146 does as well. So educating others. Giving is a big deal. I mean, I'll often have, after I speak at a place, I'll be like, besides give money, what can I do? And it's sort of like get that out of the way. But the reality is sometimes the simplest and most effective thing you could do is to give generously to the work of those that are in the trenches doing the work and everything. It empowers us to be able to do the work that we do. It's a simple way of engaging, and it is, don't ever discount that as, that's not as meaningful as if I was a social worker like Kristen over there that are in the trenches and working directly with kids and everything. This is the stuff that makes that happen. It's the gas being put into the car. Absolutely crucial. And then the other thing is vocational. Thinking about how can I engage vocationally. We tell people all the time, like, I'll have, it's such a funny thing. When I speak in places, this is what I typically will, this is a typical sort of reaction. You'll have oftentimes, women will come up and sometimes will be like, man, what happens? So what happens to these kids? Can you adopt these children? Or are you able to, and there's this sort of like, I want to somehow be there for these kids that have had these horrific things happen. And then I'll have the guys come up and do the whole sort of like Liam Neeson Taken scene, right? It was like, I've got skills. I'm not kidding you that I've had guys come up and be like, I used to be special ops for so-and-so, I used to, I'll basically saying, I want to break down a brothel door, sort of thing. Well, that's most of the time not very helpful at all. What I would challenge guys in oftentimes is like, man, if you really want to do something meaningful, become like a big brother, join the Big Brothers program and become a mentor to young men and stuff who are desperately needing to see some sort of model of what a man potentially is supposed to look like and be like and care and love and all, and right away you see this glaze sort of like, oh, it's not as sexy as like breaking down a brothel door, or it's going to take way more sacrifice because it means giving a good chunk of my life up in mentoring young men that are struggling or whatever and everything. But it's still one of the most meaningful and practical things that you can do if you're serious about wanting to engage. So we tell people all the time, you don't have to be an investigator, you don't have to be a social worker, you don't have to be an attorney working in these issues. If you are any of those things, find a way to connect it to this issue, man, absolutely. But man, what is it that you love to do? And find a way to connect that. We have photographers, we have artists, we have musicians, we have people at Love 146 that are IT people. I mean, talk to me about IT stuff. I have a couple of my colleagues here laughing in the back. And I'm like clueless with this stuff. If I didn't have IT people working at Love 146, I'd be up a creek, man. And the organization would have been gone a long, long time ago. But IT experts that know what data looks like and how to do whatever they do with that stuff. We have a thing that we normally will put up a QR code. I mean, I just figured out, and I would tell people, like, I don't know what happens when you point your camera at this QR code. We may even have one over there, I don't know. But it opens up some magic portal or something that you go into that leads you to our stuff. But anyway, so IT people, we have marketing people, development, finance people. We have a finance department of people that just love to crunch numbers, that love to see 1 + 1 = 2 and stuff. Again, that's the stuff that gives me a headache, sort of like right here in front of my head. But man, thank God that there are experts. So man, find a way to connect your vocation or the thing that you actually love. We have pastors
that are in just absolutely planting this stuff into their people, their congregation. Like, this is something that God cares about and we should as well. And so this is how we're going to partner with what you're doing in this kind of work. And so there's all those things, using influence, educating yourself, educating others, vocationally figuring out how you can connect to the issue. That's showing up on the beach in really practical and meaningful ways that actually changes the equation. So when we do show up, anything can happen. You know, in closing, there is there's a value that we carry as an organization that we call defiant hope. And I don't know about you, but I'm like in daily desperate need of hope nowadays, right? Don't you feel like, you know, actually my colleague Jennifer was also on a train yesterday. We were both heading into New York at the same time, and it was just this like looking out the window at the tracks covered in water and our train stopped. And it was just sort of like, what is going on, man? We're in on like a 100-year flood here, and you know, it's like, you know, but there is this feeling in the world as a whole that feels like this gathering storm, right? That it's this growing darkness. And there are times that people will meet me, or people will see me speak, or hear a video that I've done, or seen a video that I've done, or whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh, Rob, I love your optimism and stuff. You're so optimistic. And I'm thinking, you don't know me at all. I'm as far from an optimist as you could possibly be. I've seen way too much to be an optimist. I'm not anti-optimist. I'm not anti-optimism. I like being around people who are optimistic. It's usually quite encouraging, right? But I think sometimes if we're not careful, optimism can tend to be passive, right? Or even move into sort of denial world, right? Where it's like, things are bad, but everything's going to work out. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not that person, okay? What I am, though, is defiantly hopeful. And what I mean by that, and the differentiation between that, is I feel like defiant hope is active and not passive. Defiant hope says, yep, things are really bad, but I insist that that's not the end of the story. I insist that things can change, and it can potentially change by my action, by me actually getting off the bus, by me actually doing something about it, right? It's not just this is what it is, it's actually doing something. In fact, I love author Rebecca Solnit. I want to read this to you. She says this when she talks about hope. She goes, to hope is to gamble. It's to bet on the future, on the possibility that an open heart and uncertainty is better than gloom and safety. To hope is dangerous, and yet it is the opposite of fear. Hope is not a lottery ticket that you sit on a sofa and clutch feeling lucky. Hope is actually an axe that you break down doors with in an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door. Hope calls for action. Action is actually impossible without hope. Anything can happen, and whether we act or not has everything to do with it. Unfortunately, the word defiance has this negative connotation to it, right? I mean, most of the time when you hear that word, I mean, if I had $1 for every time I heard the word defiant when I was growing up, from school teachers, from my parents, or whatever, you're so defiant, you're such a defiant young man. Well, let me tell you something. Now that I've attached that defiance to my hope, it's paying off in spades, because it insists on change happening, and there's action connected to it, saying, man, we're going to actually push back against what feels like growing darkness. We're insisting that that's not the end of the story or the whole story, and that's defiant hope. And here's the crazy, beautiful thing, is you know where we're learning to become defiantly hopeful from? Kids in our care. For a lot of our kids, to wake up in the morning and to choose to live another day is nothing short of an act of defiant hope. Saying that, man, I choose to. In fact, I remember bringing somebody with me one time to visit our safe home in the Philippines. And after spending a day playing with the kids, I remember playing badminton with them over and over and over again, and they were absolutely crushing us in badminton. And at the end of the day, this colleague, she's like, I'm so confused. This was not what I was expecting to see here. These kids are just like real kids. And I'm like, yep, that's because they are real kids. And they are aggressively taking their lives and their childhoods back. People will often look at organizations and be like, oh, you guys are doing such great work. We're not doing the hard work. We're witnessing the hard work. We're journeying alongside of those that are actually doing the real hard work. And so their examples of defiant hope is the stuff that keeps us going. It's the stuff that keeps us hopeful at the end of the day. You know, and there is this tension of the darkness of the situation and yet what's possible even in that situation, right? You know, years ago, I remember going and visiting our safe home in the Philippines, and attached to our safe home property, it's a massive property, is a working farm where there are animals that are being raised, and it's teaching nurturing and what nurturing is supposed to look like and everything. We have crops that are being raised to help feed the kids in the home. It's this really beautiful therapeutic environment in so many ways. Well, just before I got there, one of the goats on the farm had baby goats, right? In fact, the goat that had the baby goats' name was Rob, which is kind of interesting. I don't know whether that was to honor me or make fun of me or whatever, but the baby goat Rob somehow had the goat Rob had a baby goat, 2 baby goats, I believe it was. And when I got to the safe home, one of the kids in the safe home were so excited to show me Rob's baby goat. She comes running up to me, she's 5 years old, she comes running up to me, she grabs me by the hand, and she takes me and we run down to the farm to see the baby goats, right? Have you ever seen baby goat videos? YouTube, on YouTube, just put in the search bar, baby goats. There are literally millions of videos of baby goats, and there's a reason for that, because baby goats are hilarious. They're hysterical, right? Their antics are just, they boing straight up and down, and they try to get the highest point on, and they're absolutely hilarious, right? So we go running down there, she grabs me by the hand, we go running down there, and we watch, and sure enough, the baby goats are hysterical. They're boinging all over the place, on top of each other, on top of rocks and everything. She is laughing hysterically, right? Like a little 5-year-old kid should laugh at baby goats. I'm laughing hysterically, more at her laughing hysterically than even at the baby goats, until I start paying attention to the size of the hand that was holding mine. And then I was hit with the reality of, my God, holding the hand, this tiny hand of a 5-year-old in a place called a safe home? There shouldn't even have to be a place called a safe home for 5-year-old kids. And the reality of the harshness of why she was there, yet at the same time, the absolute defiant hope that was being displayed in and through her of literally taking her joy back and taking her life back, was such an extraordinary, strange mix of these worlds. But when we show up, we get off the bus, and we engage in meaningful ways, beautiful things happen. People take their lives back. Children take their childhoods back. I'll end with this story. Also years ago, I remember visiting a safe home in another country in Southeast Asia, and there was this little girl that comes running up to me, and she's like laughing and trying to tell me something. She's grabbing my shirt and pulling on my shirt, chattering away in a language that I don't speak or understand. But she's trying desperately to tell me something. As she's pulling on my shirt, talking. And I'm like, I was so frustrated because I couldn't understand what she was trying to say. So I called one of the caregivers over that I knew could translate into English. So I said, hey, this little girl is trying so hard to tell me something. Can you tell me what she's saying? And so this translator leans down and she listens to this girl as the girl tells her what she wants to tell me, right? And I see what looks like a smirk come over the caregiver's face, right? And she looks up at me, she's like, Rob, she wants to teach you to dance. You guys, all right, I don't dance, okay? It's not something that's gonna happen in any sort of scenario. My kids say that when I try to dance, I flail, all right? So I flail more than I dance. But when a kid that has been through this kind of trauma is giggling and bright-eyed and trying desperately to teach me to dance in a situation like this, you dance.
And I will never forget that afternoon as this little girl was teaching me the moves to this traditional Cambodian dance. And I'm trying desperately to mimic these and copy these moves and everything, attracting the attention of other kids in the safe home that start to gather around, and we're laughing hysterically at the awkward white guy trying to look graceful, man. I'll never forget that day or that moment. I don't know if I ever really saw or understood what true celebration looks like as I did that day. And later on, I asked this translator, I said, can you tell me a little bit about her? I said, she just stole my heart away. And she began to tell me this girl's story, and it was pretty horrific. And she says, but Rob, she was just a year ago, this little girl would spend her days isolated at the edge of the safe home property, sitting in a pile of dirt, trying desperately to disappear into the ground by pouring handfuls of dirt overhead. It was the same girl. I didn't even recognize her. The transformation was so powerful and so like beautiful and everything. I didn't even know that it was the same girl that I had met just literally a year before. I don't know about you, but I believe in a God who brings beauty from ashes. I've seen him do it, and the crazy, beautiful thing is he uses people like you and I to do that if we engage in meaningful ways. So thank you for caring. It's a long journey. You know, I think it was Billie Holiday said this. She said, the impossible, it's not impossible. It's just going to take a little while, right? Or Einstein, who was pretty smart, he said, it's not about being smart. It's just that I stick with problems longer. And so we stick it out, we continue on, and we see change happen. Thank you for caring. Thank you for engaging.
We're good. Well, good morning, everyone. I was just fired and inspired by what Rob just shared. That was just an incredible perspective and life experience that he laid on the table before us. And it was deep and was hard to listen to. But with that said, there's light in this darkness. And that's what we always want to be coming back to. This is a really dark thing to talk about. And there's almost a good news, bad news element to this, right? The bad news, I think, is summed up in Psalm 10. And I won't read the entire psalm to you, but it says, arise, O Lord, punish the wicked, O God, do not ignore the helpless. Why do the wicked get away with despising God? They think God will never call us to account. But you see the trouble and grief they cause. You take note of it and punish them. The helpless put their trust in you. You defend the orphans. Break the arms of these wicked, evil people. Go after them until the last one is destroyed. The Lord is king forever and ever. The godless nations will vanish from the Lord. Lord, you know the hopes of the helpless. Surely you will hear their cries and comfort them. Here's, to me, the last verse of this psalm is just so powerful. You will bring justice to the orphans and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them. And Rob shared the perspective, and I remember Wild Kingdom like it was yesterday, Rob. That image of a lion crouching in the grass is what this verse is speaking to. There are predators, there are people with bad intent around this world that are crouching in the grass. That's the bad news. The good news is when Jesus was invited to go, he visited his hometown, right, in Nazareth, and he was invited to go to the synagogue and speak up and stand up and speak. It's amazing to me, where does Jesus go when he opens the scroll? Jesus makes a beeline to Isaiah 61, 1 through 3. He deliberately picks that. And here's the good news. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted, to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. Amen. Jesus always made a beeline to the oppressed, the captive, to those who are being held in bondage. He made a beeline to the woman at the well. He made a beeline to the demon-possessed man who was living in the caves. He made a beeline to the pool at Bethesda. He was always going to where there was brokenness, bondage, hurt, pain, and bringing hope, and the hope that Rob talked about. So as we go through the rest of this morning and you reflect when you leave here about this subject and topic of human trafficking, let's live in hope and let's live in purpose. No matter what God is calling us to do as individuals, we will not get sucked into the darkness that is just core at this. I've had the opportunity to be the care pastor at Walnut Hill Community Church over in Bethel for 10 years. I just recently retired in January. But during that 10-year period of time, I had the opportunity to come alongside of a number of families. My wife and I do a lot of marriage counseling. I'm in recovery myself, and so I do a lot of work with the recovery community. Pastor Peyton and I have worked together on some stuff. And the hope that only Jesus brings to the darkness that's in this world is palatable, it's real, and it's eternal. And so our hope is in Him, and He will give us the strength and everything we need to step into this space. I had a mom come to me at one point. No, she was a grandma. The mom was not in the house. And she said, Pastor John, my granddaughter who was living with her, 16, told me that she's headed out to Newburgh, New York this afternoon to meet her boyfriend. I said, well, what do you mean, meet her boyfriend? Well, they had been communicating online for a number of months, and he convinced her to go out to Newburgh and meet her in Newburgh. And I said, Georgine, you cannot let her go. She had never met this man. And it was like a 4-month correspondence online. And this was the reality of what was happening, with her granddaughter in her house, in regards to a potentially really dangerous situation. And I share that because we're going to get into a discussion with Amy and Tim and Rob. I'm glad you stuck around because we may need to defer to you once in a while. But what are the practical questions and things that we can do as individuals in this room as we look to various opportunities to step into this space called human trafficking? And very often it's right there in our own circle of friends, our own families. I'm a grandfather in addition to a father. And so I'm always concerned about what our kids see. And so we'll talk about that. A little bit about myself. As I had mentioned, I was a pastor at Walnut Hill and have recently retired. I'm currently the chairman of the board of the Underground New England. The Underground New England is about 10 years old, founded through the work of this incredible woman named Anne-Marie Boulay, who sat on the Berlin Turnpike and watched the traffic and trade happening in the hour rate hotels, where people would buy take an hour of a hotel time. And she saw the coming and going and the activity that was happening there. And God just laid it on her heart to start really stepping into this and understanding what it is and what we could do. And so it grew over time. It's just become this tremendous ministry and opportunity to bring light into this darkness. A little bit different than Love 46, the Underground, actually our primary age group is after the children turn 18. Most of our work is actually with adults, men and women. And so here with me today is Amy. Amy is, for all intents and purposes, our operations director at the Underground. She works with the survivors that we're coming alongside of on a daily basis, and we're not talking single-digit survivors. We're talking in the tens and hundreds. This is a very real issue here in Connecticut, here in Danbury, in Hartford, in Waterbury, Bridgeport, Fairfield. Doesn't matter. I also am pleased to introduce Tim Palmbach. Tim, where I might be able to give the spiritual perspective on this, Amy can certainly give kind of a practical, operational, here's what we are dealing with on a daily basis, living skills kind of perspective. Tim brings with us the enforcement element, the law enforcement perspective. Tim is recently the chair of the Henry Lee Institute at University of New Haven, which is a worldwide institute globally recognized for forensics work. And Tim's specialty in forensics has been the global movement of people, specifically people who are being trafficked. And I've got the honor and opportunity to know Tim quite well over a number of years. And he has been in situations that we couldn't imagine nor ever want to be in this space of human trafficking. But his specialty now is actually cyber trafficking and what is happening with respect to trafficking happening over the internet and our computer networks. And so between the three of us, and again, Love 146's presence this morning, we wanted to make sure we gave you an opportunity to ask what's on your mind. And so I'm going to stop talking and actually just open it up to questions and see if we can tackle over the next 45 minutes or so, what are some practical things that are on your minds and what would you like to know? And we will attempt our best to go through it. Yes?
So I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit about, I know you talked about the children, and so in the past, in listening to this topic, I always focused on girls, female. Is there an issue with males and boys? If you could speak to that.
We'll take a crack, and then if you want to add something. And actually, Amy, that might be a good opportunity. Yeah.
I would love to talk about that. Thank you. So I have the opportunity to work with survivors every day. It's a real honor and privilege. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of about the Underground New England is that we serve male survivors as well as female. And I actually, so it's really hard to give you statistics about men. They're so undercounted. There's a huge stigma. Men don't know they're being trafficked. They don't know they're being exploited. And if they do, they're not going to tell you it because they're ashamed. I'm a man, how can this be happening to me? But it is happening to them. And so because of that, it's significantly undercounted. One of my favorite statistics actually comes from Love 146. They had an Instagram post once where they said, I believe 15% of their clients are men, but they estimate up to 40% of survivors are male. That's 40%. That's a huge number, and yet nobody talks about them. Very few organizations exist to serve men. There is one transitional home for adult male survivors in the entire United States, in Texas. There's a number of adult transitional homes that serve female survivors. There's several all over the states. We need more, but there's several. There's one home for men. So it's a real issue, and they're significantly underserved. They need outreach to even learn that it's happening to them. They need programs tailored specific to their needs. What a male survivor needs might be different from what a female survivor needs. And then they just need care. They need access to homes. They need access to finances. They need access to people who care about them and are willing to walk alongside them. And at the Underground New England, we actually have the honor of having a male survivor who serves with us and is able to meet men and say, hey, I know what it's like. I've been there. It's okay to talk about it. And I had the privilege, I met in Waterbury, I got to meet a male survivor. We were intaking him into our program, and he was taking me through his story. And at the end of it, I asked, do you know what human trafficking is? And he said, I just learned what that word was this week. And now he has people who understand what it's like, and we get to walk alongside him. So we've just scratched the surface of male survivors.
Do you want to comment on the child center?
Perfect. I mean, that's exactly the situation. We have on our board of directors, we have a male survivor, and this is where he goes all the time. He's like, this is so underreported, and for all the reasons that he just said. But it's definitely. In fact, we have a boys' home in the Philippines that was created, and it was the same kind of thing when we created it. It was like nobody even thought that was an issue. But again, part of that is because of how the media and how we portray the issue, and even how we portray vulnerability, who's vulnerable and who's not. Those are all issues that are relevant.
Thank you. Yes.
One of the things for me in trying to understand human trafficking is the types of trafficking. I think we hear, the most I've heard about is sexual exploitation. What are the other types of
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Tim, I'm going to ask you to take that one, given your broad experience.
I was actually going to jump in on that to answer the other question. Labor trafficking by numbers is still the largest, and I don't think we should ever say one's worse than the other. It's all absolutely horrific. Labor trafficking, bonding traffic, domestic bonding is more prevalent overseas, but it's still a very large problem. You hear even in the U.S. If you do some research, even some agricultural cases are in the U.S., even though most of them you'll see down on the southern border or out on the west coast. Yeah, I mean, it's anytime you exploit an individual, take away their freedom to make gain and to make purposes. A lot of my work has been overseas. I would say probably 80% of it has been tied to government counterterrorism activities. And you say, how did that ever happen? I ask myself why I got involved to begin with, which is because money. And so that was the money flow. Therefore, that was the interest that government and people that had money were focusing on. And so we nicely we blackmailed government agencies into doing the right thing, to integrating human rights perspectives and dealing with some of the survivors. And in lieu of that, we would give them training and guidance and tools and technologies for dealing with this absolutely enormous displaced person or refugee crisis that we're seeing. I mean, you can have whatever opinion you have about the border crisis, but it's only happening because of the horrific world from where these people are coming. And so those are political issues, there's social issues, and so much of what we do, we have to think about how am I going to get an access point? What will people listen to us for? What will they fund us for? But I'm glad you asked that question because it is way beyond. How many people get your nails done, for example? Well, I could give you the stats, coming out of New York City and even Connecticut of the amount of trafficking victims that are engaged in that industry. Now, there are legitimate people doing this, okay? However, the volume of trafficking victims within that particular industry is fairly high. And, and it's amazing is we all kind of know it, and I'm like, I've been doing this half the amount of time you have, maybe 11 years. You blessed me a lot more today than you probably know, because hope is something I'm really desperately running out of, and I'm like, oh, okay, if he has hope, I guess I have to have hope. But it's because of it. I mean, and I think focusing on the survivors and seeing their victories and their courage is really, oh yeah, that helps. I don't get to do that often. That's actually the harder job. Mine's much easier going over there dealing with government and bad people. But not seeing the survivors means we lose track of what matters anyway, because it's not a number and it's an ever-flowing tide. But yeah, awareness is great. Thank you for asking the question.
Yes.
How do we recognize the signs, say, at a nail salon, that they might be, trafficking humans in such an establishment?
Again, I don't deal with the people as much, so I'm gonna Amy, I'll put that to you.
I'll try to tackle that one. Specifically at nail salons, so I don't have as much experience with labor trafficking. That's an underserved population, especially in Connecticut, and we're working on growing that. But just general signs that you can look for. Do they seem uncomfortable? Are they avoiding eye contact? Do they seem on edge? Are they scared of every little sound? Does it seem like someone's controlling them? That, you know, it can be hard as a customer to come in and see that. If you're talking to somebody, if you get to know them, does it seem like they have control over their money? That can be a warning sign as well. Yeah, to be honest, as a customer coming in, it can be a little hard, but I would say, do they seem comfortable? Are they looking over their shoulder? That's a big red flag. Do they seem nervous when the owner comes into the room? You know, there's shyness, and that can be they're just not very talkative, but if you're smiling at them and they're not really returning that, that can be a red flag as well. And if you go on both Love 146's website and on the Underground New England's website, we have a whole list of red flags that you can look for in children and adults. I'm only listing a couple off the top of my head.
I'll jump in there really quickly. That's the right stuff. That's the hard stuff. Red flag stuff is great. I know Love 146 does that. But here's the frustrating part. You'll even hear, and we've had some cases we've assisted with, where you'll have people say, oh yeah, well, I'm a business owner and I watch this van with New York plates every morning at 6 a.m. show up and, you know, and 15 people pile out of the van and then they get picked up again at 8:30 and back. And I'm like, it doesn't take a PhD to figure out that that's not right. And so it's sometimes it's just the simplest of things. And I think it means being in your community, talking to people, caring about people. If you do those things, you'll find out. You'll see it.
What is the enforcement mechanism once you identify what's going on? How do you finding them and the victims? But what do you do once you find them? I mean, how do you stop the people that are doing what they're doing?
I'm going to let them answer part one, which is the hotline and who to call and how to do it. I'll let them do that.
But I meant from a legal perspective.
I'll answer that back part because their answer is more important to you than mine. So.
Well, so the first thing is, if you do see any red flags, even if you're not sure, go ahead and call the hotline. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, I don't have the number memorized, but if you Google it, it's on all of our material. Yeah. Call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, let them know your concerns. And actually, well, this is Danbury, but there's a trafficking task force, anti-human trafficking task force in the greater Hartford area, and they have a tip line as well that you can call, and that number's on our website. So if there's anything that sets off a warning bell in your mind, go ahead and call, and then that's, Polaris processes them, they assess, is this actually a risk, and then they start talking to law enforcement.
So law enforcement's a much trickier problem, and there's about 8 phases to this. One, let's start with the obvious, which is resource, and this is I'm biased. I spent 22 years in the law enforcement community, so I'll gladly say I'm biased. There's nowhere near enough support, both emotionally, legally, and fiscally, for them to do their job at the moment. So you now ask them to intervene in a case which is not a pending emergency, right? And one that's going to be an exceedingly difficultly long road of an investigation. I mean, the snatch and grab, and I know we're all dancing around this issue, which is public, but I will fully affirm what Rob says. He's got more experience than I do, but I've been overseas enough and unfortunately spent enough years in the undercover side of it to tell you that snatch and grab is exactly the wrong thing to do. We would only do it if the individual was physically in danger at the moment. In other words, they're bleeding. They're not, they have a chance of dying if we leave. That was the only exception. And you understand when you do that, you destroy probably a year's worth of work. It's gone. And so yes, you'll save the child at all costs, but that ideal of running in and snatching and grabbing is just fundamentally wrong, and we'll leave it at that. So it is a very, very long process. The only good news about the internet when it comes to this is it's created an information stream and a pathway and a mechanism where we can further investigate these types of cases. But there's a whole nother problem with that, and maybe we'll get there in questions in a few minutes if that's of interest to people. But these are long, slow processes from the investigative point of view. They always have to be victim-centric, which means there's no sense in running rickshaw over and destroying somebody in order to make your case. And that means that our standard kind of law enforcement approaches are very different. We'll treat a gangbanger, I don't know what else to call them, differently than we're going to treat a trafficking victim, right? Our investigative methodologies will be different. So it's just a long, hard road, yeah.
And the other thing I would add to that is, well, law enforcement is incredibly important and helpful, and actually arresting the trafficker, that's what makes change and stops other people from being trafficked. For the victim, for the survivor, sometimes they just need to get out, and that can be done without getting law enforcement involved. They go into the bathroom, they see a sign, they get an outreach card, they make contact with somebody, they go into the hospital for some reason, related to trafficking, but not because they're fleeing it, they just need to go to the hospital. And I've gotten calls from hospital workers who are like, hey, we talked to you, you taught us the red flags, we're seeing some stuff, can you come in and talk to them? And then we'll come in and we'll say, hey, here's a bag with some nice things for you. Let's talk a little bit, let's get to know each other. And that might be the exit point for them. And 5 years down the road, that's when they're ready to talk to law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So it's wonderful what law enforcement does, but a survivor doesn't need law enforcement breaking down the door in order for them to start their journey to freedom.
I'm in law enforcement, so I do sex assault investigations and these types of investigations. And most people don't understand that the legal standard for human trafficking is much higher than what most of us perceive to be human trafficking. Just transporting someone who's a vulnerable population and having sex with them if they're not underage isn't what legally they can be prosecuted for. But a lot of these people are still victims, so if you get Love 146 involved, even if law enforcement can't take action, which is very often the case, at least they're exposed to the services and giving the services if they choose to avail themselves to it.
That's great, thank you. Thanks for having that. I have a question. We've heard a lot of talk about, the changing nature of engaging a person who's being trafficked. The purchasing of people that's going on today is primarily done in what ways?
Well, a lot of it is online. And it's interesting, even some of the overseas work, in like maybe 20 countries or so that I was involved in, even third world countries made transitions into online formats. It's like, this is crazy. Southeast Asia, like, you all have cell phones, what's going on here? So it's not just an American problem, but it's a huge problem here. And it's gotten exponentially worse since that 2020 tagline moment we all look at called the Great Pandemic. But leading up to that, there was technology shifts. So what was happening was we had some great successes in law enforcement against online exploitation because it was all we call open source information, data information. It was available to us. And probably the biggest example of that is in the Backpage era. And there were plenty of nonprofits, Thorn Foundation is one, and the Carnegie Mellon Group, Traffic Jams another. We'll go out and scrape this data, they would analyze the data, they'd find the advertisements, they'd find the victims, they'd find investigative leads, they'd give it to law enforcement. Their job was not easy, but it was doable. But there was a major shift that began probably around 2018, 2019, and it got exacerbated in 2020, and there's many companies did it. Probably leading the way is good old-fashioned OnlyFans. Has anybody heard of them? And they've gotten exceedingly good at it. Why they're so successful is they have this thing called a paywall, which means we can no longer monitor them, we can no longer see what they're doing, we no longer get full data scrapes out of them. And in doing that, you are hiding what's been behind there. So, yes, can we respond to a complaint of somebody? Sure, and then we think they're underage and they have an OnlyFans account, we can go look at that. But currently, that one platform has got 250, I think they're almost 300 million paying subscribers, and they're just under 3 million content creators. So think about how you can possibly monitor even that one site unless you would have the access to that. The other reality that happened is this thing called live streaming, which is, and that's impossible for us to monitor because that is a direct message. This is a trafficker or a pedophile or an abuser directly contacting an underage child and engaging in, show me this, do that, in live time. And because it's in live time and often it's not recorded or captured as imaging, there's no monitoring to it, there's no data set for us to go back to. So it's a technology problem that's really created. There's my feeling of hopelessness. My other feeling of hopelessness in this area is the money. I've been working with a big group who are mainly focused with lobbying groups, government assistance groups out of DC. And we've been going after the financial side of it on the federal level because it's obviously a money thing. And if we can target the acquiring banks and the credit card servicing providers and get them to say no, which by the way, they're not going to do because they're making tens of billions of dollars. Most of the major acquiring banks and credit card companies, if you did an FOI and found out where they're making most of their money, a lot of it's coming out of the adult content industry. But the reality is they will never, ever choose to stop this on their own. And we have got to find a way to pressure Congress and other federal agencies to say they're in violation of these regulatory standards, these banking violations, you should be able to shut them down. Why isn't that happening? Well, there's vested interest. Obviously, the money's there. There is a big battle now over First Amendment rights. There's a huge battle out there about what's pornography, what should be allowed, what shouldn't be allowed. The sex worker industry, believe it or not, is wildly powerful, heavily financed. And all of that, that's a whole nother argument. I guess since most of us are in a church crowd, we'd probably be against most of everything we talked about. But even if assuming you were saying, I am a strong First Amendment advocate and I believe in free pornography and a woman's expression to do what she wants, okay, fine and dandy. However, you've allowed for an environment where exploitation is now hidden and occurring on a daily basis. And to what extent should that change your point of view? And I think it should be a dominant effect. But what we're seeing, again, the driving money in the financial sector and the political pressure from others to say, oh no, let's not jump into that. This is a tough situation. I think being in this group, I'll steal your role, Pastor, is you better pray, because other than that, I don't know what the answer is. I'm kind of running out of ideas here, or if you have a great idea, I'll take it too. But great question.
Yes.
This question is, like with prostitution, how does that tie in with the trafficking and the victimizing of it? Because we know that a lot of prostitutes are not doing it willingly. And so are they still being prosecuted as like criminals, or do they tie in with this trafficking?
I'll answer that, and then I'm sure Tim will have more to say to that. So I think I want to talk more about the concept of prostitution, and then maybe Tim, you can talk more about what's actually happening legally. I would say the vast majority of people that we think of as prostitutes are actually being exploited or trafficked. And there's two different ways that I would categorize that. So there's people that are very, and I especially see this with adults, they're very explicitly being trafficked. There's a pimp who's sending them out on the street and telling them, come home when you have this much money, or more likely, don't come home until you have this much money. And you might see them on the street, or you might, and street prostitution does still happen, or they're online, or they're in the clubs. That's one form of it. Another form, unfortunately, is when somebody has been trafficked and exploited from childhood into adulthood. What is the first thing they're going to do when they are homeless, when they need the next fix of their drug that they're on because of the abuse that happened to them? The only way they know to survive, the only way they know to make money is to sell themselves. I consider survival sex exploitation. The person buying doesn't necessarily know the person is desperate, and there may not be a pimp behind them, but they would never have chosen to do that if it was not for what happened to them leading up to that moment. So, does the government, to the point earlier, is law enforcement going to look at them and say they're being trafficked? No, because they are in that moment choosing to sell themselves. But the only reason they're making that choice is because they have been abused, exploited, and trafficked for years.
I think you're throwing the hot ball at me. You guys over there could do this better. I guess I'll take the punch and you can save me. There's a lot, Earning Act is one of the things that's trying to go through our legislative process now, which I would be pretty much aligned with. But these are the different legislative changes that we can make, and one of them would be to let's fully decriminalize the activity of the seller, right, of victim, the survivor, and while we maintain the criminalization of those who are making money on it, or the abuser, or the purchaser. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in following that pathway. Now, again, logically, I think all we're saying, well, probably most of us say that makes great sense. Why isn't that just happening? And I'm telling you, it's not going to happen without a lot of efforts by many of you, because it is a complex matter. Others are pushing, like I said, again, sex workers' rights, women empowerment, right to choose, First Amendment, and that whole variety of arguments. And they're persuasive, unfortunately, in the places that are going to make the decisions about legislation. So that is an area you can do. You can inform yourself, learn well, so that you can speak effectively and talk to all your congressional as well as state representatives and say current status quo is not good enough and legislative changes are really definitely needed in this area.
We have a question.
Is there a correlation between drug trafficking in this country and this problem? I mean, do they sort of, one fight, which came first, the chicken and the egg, or they both coming together?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for those who weren't able to hear the question, if I heard, is there a correlation between drug trafficking and human trafficking?
Human trafficking. I mean, do they sort of go hand in hand? One leads the other?
Yeah. Absolutely. Human trafficking is the second or third largest illicit industry in the world. To put some numbers on what Tim was talking about, we're talking over $150 billion worldwide. I saw one statistic that estimated the United States makes up 50% of that industry. And so the one that it's neck and neck with is drugs. And where there's drugs, there's trafficking. Where there's trafficking, there's drugs. Drugs are used to control people. They're not being locked up in cages. They're not being kept in a basement. Sometimes they are. Don't get me wrong, that happens. But what's being happened is they need their fix. Either they were put on it and now they can't get off it, or for whatever reason, for whatever trauma, they got into drugs and now they're out of options.
And this is going to be the elephant in the room question. Which country is probably the biggest offender right now to America as far as this problem? I mean, that you can see overall. I mean,
is your question who's the biggest purchaser?
No. Which country are they coming out of?
Oh.
Obviously, they say this country, that country, but right here in America, our problem right now, which country is supplying, number one, probably importing the most drugs, and which one is probably influencing this trafficking situation?
There's a danger in answering that question, and I'll pointing it to a country, because we can very quickly turn our eyes from them to us. Do you remember recently, I would say within the last 5 years in Danbury, there was a man convicted of trafficking boys. It was a friend in Westport, and they had been doing it for years, and these were young men with mental and emotional challenges. This is happening right here, and it's happening right here a lot. DCF would tell you that it's happening. So whether it's Costa Rica, I've done a lot of work down in Costa Rica with an organization called Face of Justice. Costa Rica, prostitution is legal. It is a gateway into the United States for the migration of folks into the U.S. through South America. The number of children that are being trafficked in Costa Rica will blow your mind. And the challenge is huge. It has become kind of the new Cambodia for U.S. business people to go down, have their fishing trips, and oh, by the way, we'll call this hotline number and we'll get us, some kids or some men or some women for our party. We're the biggest purchaser, by the way, in Costa Rica, Americans. But with that said, statistically, Tim, I don't know what the biggest country is, but let's remember, right here in that street, there's people that are being held against their will in bondage for labor or for sex trade.
Every single one of the Underground's clients is a U.S. citizen. Not that we don't serve non-U.S. citizens, but every referral that's come to us is a U.S. citizen. 90% of our waiting list is U.S. citizens.
In the quest for information, I love information too. There's two things you can look at. The U.S. Department of State does an annual TIP report, Trafficking in Persons report, and they'll go country by country. It's publicly available, you can read it. And then there's a Global Slavery Index, which is a global version of that, another source of it. Having said that, hopefully this isn't offensive to you, but I think you're asking the wrong question. I think the better matrix Rob pointed out, and that's vulnerability. So worry less about a country border and about activity. So when you have war, strife, hunger, poverty, natural disaster, economic instability, lack of rule of law, all of those things drive vulnerability. Once you drive vulnerability, you'll have plenty of bad actors that can easily look at it as an opportunity to make money with little recourse or little threat. And so the focal point's got to be where are the current vulnerabilities. So I'll go back to the southern border again. That's a really hot political potato, and we could all have our feelings about it. But from the trafficking perspective, that's a highly vulnerable population at the moment, right? Whether you're talking about, a 20-year-old kid or a little child or, elderly parents, whoever is either being coyoted across, making the migration, however you want to put it, coming there, they're a vulnerable population. And so is there a lot of trafficking associated with that? Absolutely there is, right? Without a shadow of a doubt. That's created a trafficking problem for us. So anywhere or anyhow that we see a vulnerability, we need to be able to respond. And one of our biggest vulnerabilities in the U.S. is this stupid thing called the internet, which is just open Pandora's box, and kids can see the amazing amount of stuff easily every day without any recourse, and that gateway is just a direct, like a 4-lane highway for people to get to their kids.
It's 11:40, and I do want to honor the agenda and Reverend Mello's word that he wants to share with us. But just let me wrap, and we'll be available to answer questions and the like. But just to close out with this thought, we've all heard some really good suggestions. It's hard to sit in this kind of thing and listen to policy changes, enforcement changes, things like that, and walk out with a tangible, but what can I do? And I've heard several that I just want to remind us all of. One is, as Rob said, educate ourselves, learn more about the reality of what this is all about. And there's a lot of resources out there. The second, and I'm passionate about this, maybe because I am a grandfather, my 2-year-old grandson took this watch, and after about 2 minutes did something with it. I had to call my daughter and say, your son completely reprogrammed my watch and I can't use it anymore. I watched him pick up my daughter's cell phone, and he already at the age of 2 is swiping through screens. And yet, as a pastor, I've had parents say they don't know what to do about their son or their daughter in their cell phone usage or their iPad usage, their tablet, whatever. And I ask, do you ask them or do you look at what they're doing? Oh no, they won't give it to me. I'm serious. There's been parents who have said they won't let me have it. If there's one thing I would encourage everyone to do when they leave here is think about your circle of family and friends and the power of what this connects me to Tim's point that he just made. This will link a kid to all sorts of danger and evil, and they won't even know it. So if you've got a daughter or a son who have kids, ask them, are you asking to see your son or daughter's phone? How often? Do you need to ask? Do you ever take it? And just look at it. I know it treads this fine line of a father-son teenager relationship. Been there, done that, I know. But at the end of the day, you would rather have your son or your daughter safe than potentially getting in a car and driving out to Newburgh, New York, to meet with some guy that you've never met and she's never met. So I'm going to stop there, and again, we'll hate to cut these kinds of things short. We do have at the table over here some of those crisis numbers and some really good pointers to additional information. And again, thank you.
A moment here, and then we'll have a word. Grab me one of the microphones.
Bishop Jeffrey Mello of the Episcopal Church in Connecticut wished he could have been here, but with other things that are going on in the diocese, he couldn't be here today. But he did send us a message, so I'm going to play that right now. I think it's just a very important message for us to hear to cap off what we've heard this morning.
Good morning, companions in Mission Ministry Network. Thank you for gathering on this Saturday morning to do the important work of paying attention to human trafficking in Connecticut and how we as the Episcopal Church can join in the good work of ending that sin in this country. It is of note that Jesus early on in his ministry quotes Isaiah 61:1 in the 4th chapter of Luke by saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord." That is the work you are about. Set at liberty those who are oppressed, proclaiming liberty to the captives. This is critical work for us to be doing in the Episcopal Church in Connecticut, and critical in Connecticut as a state, and I'm so grateful that you are there. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you to join with you in this work, but know that you are in our prayers, and we give God great thanks that you are set to this task. I look forward to hearing what has come of your day together, and please keep us informed in the larger life of the diocese about how we can all join in this critical work of setting at liberty those who are oppressed. Again, thank you, good morning, and God bless you.